Fines. Despite modern ideas about medieval brutality, some punishments were financial. Nearly every manor, borough, and church court relied on fines because they were simple, fast, and profitable. Offences like brewing bad ale, missing a work duty, starting fights, letting animals damage crops, or breaking local customs usually resulted in small monetary penalty. Manorial rolls from England, France, and the Holy Roman Empire show page after page of routine fines, often a few pennies, but enough to sting for a peasant earning only a few pounds a year. Even minor nobles were fined when they disrupted the peace. Fines were preferred because they didn't remove labourers from the fields or households from the economy. Locking someone up wasn't practical. A fine solved the issue, recorded the offence, and added revenue to the lord or town. Public penance. Church courts handled a large share of medieval discipline, especially for moral or community-based offences. Their approach focused on shame and spiritual correction, and generally not physical pain. Public penance typically involved standing outside the church in simple clothing, carrying a candle, or walking through the village while confessing the wrongdoing. Parish records across England, Scotland, and France describe people doing penance for adultery, slander, drunkenness, and disputes with the neighbours. Because villages were small and everyone knew each other, being singled out was deeply uncomfortable. Public penance worked because reputation mattered. A person punished in front of their neighbours often felt the consequences for months. It reinforced moral behaviour without damaging the workforce or creating long-term resentment. Stocks. The stocks were a common village punishment for disorderly behaviour, small thefts, or drunken outbursts. Offenders sat on a bench with their ankles locked in wooden boards, usually placed in a busy square or near the churchyard. The point was public humiliation and deterrence, often involving abuse from a passerby and exposure to the elements. Manorial and borough records from the 13th to 15th centuries show the stocks used regularly across England and northern Europe. Passerby would mock, scold, or occasionally throw rotten scraps at the offender. In some towns, the punishment lasted a few hours. In others, it could last a full day. For small communities, the stocks acted as a warning. This is what happens when you disturb the peace. It also avoided harsher penalties for minor crimes. The stocks were cheap, public, and effective at discouraging repeat behaviour. Pillory. The pillory worked similar to the stocks, but was considered more serious. Instead of locking only the ankles, it held the offender's head and hands upright, leaving them exposed in the most vulnerable way. Town records show that the pillory was used for fraud, cheating the market, selling bad goods, or violating trade rules. Merchants who used false weights and measures were frequent occupants. Unlike the stocks, the pillory could be dangerous. Angry crowds sometimes threw stones or filth, and injuries weren't uncommon. Because the pillory focused on dishonesty rather than violence, it reinforced trust in markets and trade. Medieval towns depended on reliable merchants, and fraud threatened that stability. Whipping. Whipping was used across Europe for petty theft, vagrancy, repeat disorderly behaviour, or failure to pay certain fines. It was designed to be fast and memorable. The offender was often tied to a post or cart tail, and lashes were given according to local customs or court order. Unlike later centuries, medieval whipping wasn't usually intended to cause permanent damage. Records often specify modest numbers of strokes, just enough to create pain and humiliation. Town constables or church beadles usually carried it out. Whipping was common because it didn't require long-term imprisonment, which was expensive and impractical. A few minutes of pain served as a deterrent, and the offender was then sent back to work. Imprisonment. Despite modern expectations, medieval prisons weren't designed for long sentences. Imprisonment was typically usually owned while awaiting trial, paying a debt, or arranging a final ransom. Keeping people locked up cost money, food, guards, maintenance, so most courts avoided it. When longer confinement occurred, it was often for political prisoners, nobles awaiting negotiation, or debtors. Castle dungeons, town jails, and monastic cells appear frequently in records, but the stays were usually weeks or months, not years. For ordinary criminals, prison was a temporary inconvenience and not the main punishment. The real sentence was delivered afterward, a fine, whipping, or public humiliation. Medieval justice aimed to restore order quickly, not maintain large prison systems. Execution. Execution was reserved for crimes viewed as direct threats to society: murder, treason, arson, repeated robbery, or crimes against the crown. Medieval Europe used various methods: hanging in England, beheading for nobles, and burning for certain forms of treason or heresy. Despite its grim reputation, execution was far less common than many people think. Local courts preferred penalties that kept workers alive and productive. Execution rates varied by region, but records show that most offenders received fines or penance instead. When execution was used, it was meant to reinforce authority and deter serious crime. Public hanging drew large crowds, not for entertainment alone, but as a communal reinforcement of law and order. It was the final step when all other forms of discipline were considered insufficient. Thanks for listening to this quick rundown of some medieval punishments. If you're new here, feel free to subscribe so you don't miss the next one.